Joining me now is Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst and the former Europe and Middle East Editor for the Associated Press. Thanks so much, Dan, for coming in. The president made a very interesting point because he says that anti-Semitism is at its worst it's ever been in the United States. But I would say that it's probably the worst it's ever been around the world. And I think some of it was only given more fuel and more fodder by what happened yesterday at the ICJ.
I view the ICJ ruling a little bit differently. It was unrealistic, I think, to expect the court to completely throw out the charges to the point that they would say, we find no possibility that part of it might be plausible. Israel wanted that. That did not occur. At the same time, the actual danger was that the court would order an end to the conflict. Now, this court, when it wants to, knows how to be unequivocal. About a year ago, it ordered Azerbaijan to end the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, and that was ignored, of course. The court didn't do that here. So viewers should focus on this. In refusing to issue an order, an injunction, calling for Israel to end the war, the court, in fact, said it's okay to proceed with the war. This is a huge thing. And, you know, if I was still at AP and applying news judgment, that would be my headline. The rest is words. And like in any legal document, there's a mountain of words and then there's a bottom line. And the bottom line is that the court asked Israel to pretty please make sure that they're not committing genocide. The court might as well have implored all people on earth to not commit genocide. I'm sure Israel will comply, and a month from now, they will issue a report explaining that they've made every effort to avoid civilian casualties. Nothing new, because they've been claiming that all along. At the end of the day, Israel's problem in public opinion is political, not legal. Legally speaking, they will not find genocide here, not after their years of deliberations on this issue. But what will be found is that people around the world will suspect that Israel caused excessive destruction in Gaza. And that really is down to politics and a question of whether relations with the U.S. are such that the U.S. will continue to give Israel its munitions, its umbrella at the UN Security Council, its support in trying to engineer days after and exit strategies and peace plans.
But the idea there, and you bring up a good point, but isn't the idea now that the paste is out of the toothpaste tube right now? It's out. I mean, in the sense that no matter what, you can't take back what people are saying online, social media, saying like, oh, you see, the ICJ said that there's plausible genocide going on.
Albert, did you observe that they needed the ICJ to do anything? And the ICJ didn't say there's plausible genocide. They said that we don't find implausibility. In short, they left everything open. And honestly, to have expected a rather political forum in the current environment in the world, when there is a lot of pressure to do something to compel Israel to be more careful, for them to have completely thrown out the case was an unrealistic expectation.
So what do you say to those people who say, you know, there's all these demonstrations in New York? Yesterday, there was a demonstration in front of AIPAC. There was demonstrations in front of Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan. They stalked and attacked people coming out of a funeral because they couldn't get the idea, the difference between anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, it's all one. What do you say to the people who are saying this has to stop?
That the war has to stop?
No, that the idea of the attacking, that the idea of all of these demonstrations, I mean, like no one of those demonstrators, no one's taking any action against those demonstrators, and no one's basically saying, especially in the American political system, no one's doing anything about it.
This is a complex matter. It defies slogans, because freedom of speech is not some theoretical thing that we can throw out when it doesn't suit us. To a certain extent, you have to accept certainly criticism of Israel, criticism of the war, and I think Jews shouldn't conflate that with anti-Semitism. On the other hand, there clearly is anti-Semitism. There clearly have been calls for genocide of the Jews. That should be treated exactly the same as calls for restoration of slavery, basically.
Right, because
freedom of speech doesn't apply.
Right, because if it was switched, if it wasn't the word Jews, if it wasn't against that, it would be, if it was outrageous. Like, oh, we're going to go attack black people, we're going to go attack Asian people, all these demonstrations would be shut down right now.
It is an outrage, and it's interesting on a global level, because we see here the extreme right and the extreme left somehow joining, united by anti-Semitism, which had previously, historically, been a matter of the far right. Remember the white supremacist protesters a couple of years ago screaming, Jews will not replace us. It was a right-wing thing. Now we find it in the far left. And it's weird how these two extremes, both are illiberal and are united in what is clearly a bubbling and spilling over anti-Semitism.
And not even just there in Italy. We're following the story today of marches throughout Italy and different cities around Italy where the far left are marching on Holocaust Memorial Day, mind you. On Holocaust Memorial Day, they were marching.
Yes.
And they're defying police orders because the police knew better, and they said, you got to shut this down, but they're defying those orders. At the same time, in Italy, you have the far right. There was a video of black-clad fascists doing basically the same thing as Sieg Heil, which is against the law. It was against the law until recently in
Funny
Italy.
how there's no freedom of speech for the Hitler salute.
Funny how that happens. So, and we're saying that very cynically, by the way. So how does Israel counter that from now on, moving forward?
It isn't a matter that it isn't something that you can simply resolve. Anti-Semitism has been around for thousands of years, and we could write books, and books have been written about the reasons for it. I think Israel could do better for its own PR in the prosecution of this war. I think Israel should be saying morning, noon, and night that the war can end in 2 seconds if a series of things were to happen that the entire world or the Western world supports. Hamas returning the Strip to the PA, if Israel could get it together to understand that's really the only option, and a return of the hostages and a disarming of the Strip, a demilitarization of the Strip. That, I think, would have support across the Western world, maybe not among a few useful idiots on U.S. campuses, but it would be supported. But Israel doesn't really do that for the political reasons that we know. Netanyahu can't afford to say very much for fear of upsetting the far right.
You were listening in on that conversation.
Yeah, it's fascinating, heartwarming, and very good to hear. Lula's an interesting case. He came to power basically as a reaction to Bolsonaro, who had his own weirdnesses and problems attached to him. I agree, he doesn't represent Brazil from everything I know. Lula is part of the far left cabal that basically has bought into these progressive narratives of oppressed and oppressor, and the Jews are slotted in as part of the oppressor. They're seen as white, they're seen as wealthy and successful, and there's not an easy way to bounce back from that in the eyes of these people except to constantly repeat the truth. In this case, Israel was attacked, and Hamas does not represent the interests of the Palestinians, only of global jihad.
Dan Perry, thanks so much for joining us. You can get the very latest here on I24 News, on TV, online, and push alerts on your phone. I'm Albert Lewis reporting from Tel Aviv. You're watching I24 News.